You're listening to Pennsylvania Mountain Stories, a book of Appalachian folktales compiled by Henry W. Shoemaker. This book was published in 1911, and I'm afraid the language reflects the biases and prejudices of the time. Bob Giry's Earrings. When Bob Giry was shot to pieces by a sheriff's posse in Kansas, after he had driven his team of ponies through a barbed wire fence in his frantic effort to escape arrest for the crime of waylaying a newly married couple who were honeymooning in a buggy, and killing the bridegroom and stealing the bride, a pair of very peculiar earrings were found in his ears. They were the form of coiled serpents, and the gold, though of the purest, was as transparent as glass, and they were lighter than the lightest aluminum. The curious crowd which gathered around his bullet-riddled and blood-clotted corpse, as it lay beneath the morning sun on the broad prairie, gave vent to considerable speculation as to the origin and history of the earrings. Though they were passed from man to man for examination, the sheriff kept a sharp look on them, lest some smart aleck should slip them in his pocket, the official regarding them as one of the chief trophies of the manhunt. It was not until several years afterwards that one of the eyewitnesses of the outlaw's ending happened to meet a traveler from central Pennsylvania, and the history of the bizarre earrings was learned and carried out to Kansas, to be whispered about by folks who feared to tell it aloud, under penalty of being called superstitious. Bob Giry's father was a very pious man, but the son grew up the direct opposite, and his proudest boast was that he had never been inside a church. As a small boy he used to break the church windows with stones, and ambush and beat his playmates on their way back from Sunday school. For profanity and blasphemy he could not be equaled, and some oaths of his own invention were too hair-raising for even the most hardened trooper or riverman. As he was growing into manhood, the late Robert G. Ingersoll's speeches and writings were in their heyday, and he became an ardent disciple of the silver-tongued agnostic. He could quote Ingersoll by the hour, and embellished his boldest statements to give them more emphasis. His irreligion became a cult with the young men of the neighborhood, and it would have been difficult at one time to find enough churchmen on the mountain to fill a Bible class. One winter, he was bossing a crew of woodsmen who were cleaning out a tract of original white pines at the head of Robin's Hollow, and before they had been in camp a week, he had converted the entire 15 of them into rabid unbelievers. Every night after supper they would gather around the big log fire in the shanty, listening to their boss's harangues against Christianity and morality in general. Bob Giry was a big fellow, black-haired, swarthy and positive. There was no arguing with him. His quotations from Ingersoll stamped him as a man of learning who should be followed. As the weeks progressed, several of the young converts became especially adept at blasphemy, and contests were held to see who could use the most profane language in alluding to sacred objects. Those who came out ahead were given easy jobs at chopping and sawing, while the mildest-tongued were compelled to do the rough work of skidding and road building. On Christmas Eve it was planned to have a grand contest of profanity and irreligion. Several old freethinkers who lived near at hand were invited to join the company. A goodly stock of whiskey and hard cider had been hauled in for the occasion from Loganton. It was a cold, starlit night, the ground being covered with snow, so the great log fire was useful to the utmost degree. To make themselves comfortable, all hands had removed their shoes and stockings, which had been soaked with snow, and many sat about clad only in trousers and undershirts. Everything religious was discussed and condemned. Ingersoll, Voltaire, Tom Paine, Benjamin Franklin, Frederick the Great, Garibaldi, and everyone else who had antagonized churches in the slightest were lauded. Between discourses the cider barrels and whiskey jugs were hit heavily, until their contents were considerably diminished. As a finale to the evening, the blaspheming match began. The idea was to say the most disrespectful things about the highest aspirations of humanity. Bob Giry led off with a torrent of profanity, and then started in to ridicule the revered topics. He had not gotten very far when a noise was heard in the chimney. "Sure, it's that old fool Santa Claus," shouted Dennis Haley, a little red-whiskered Irishman, who was one of the oldest settlers on the mountain, and the rest of the party broke out into a loud guffaw. Their humor was short-lived, for down the chimney came a huge pair of bare legs, red in color and covered with hair. The freethinkers did not wait to see any more, but dashed for the door and out into the snow, running for dear life in their unclad feet and scant attire. Bob Giry was the last out of the house, but he ran frantically for 100 feet, until he tripped over a log and fell sprawling. As he flopped, he uttered an awful howl, and his companions looked back only to see the figure of a man 8 feet tall bending over him. That sight was enough. Some never stopped running until morning. One dropped exhausted in front of a hotel at Rauchtown. Another was found in a fainting condition in the woods near Carroll, while a third was discovered sitting by the riverbank, dazed and speechless, near Allenbaugh Station. Bob promptly fainted when he saw he had been collared by the ugly stranger, but when he came to himself he was sitting in his chair by the fire in the shanty. Nearby sat the great unknown, eyeing him admiringly. "You are built after my own mold," he began, when he saw Bob was calm enough to listen. "If you were a few feet taller we'd be taken for brothers. Our features are so much alike. I did not mean to scare you off when I came in tonight. I thought the door was locked. Consequently, I came down the chimney." The stranger had a winning voice, and Bob was interested. "I would not have broken up your party, not for a mint. I only wanted to drop in and learn a few pointers. Your crowd beats the devil for cuss talk, and I came a good many miles knowing I could learn something. But on sight of me you all bolted. You're not a very hospitable gang, I'm sure. But I'm proud of you anyway, from what I have heard. Give me a drink." Bob mixed a mug of whiskey, alcohol, and cider, which the stranger drank leisurely. "I want you to keep up your good work," he resumed. "Keep at it among the young fellows. If there were a few more like you, we would have religion wiped out in 1 generation. Instead of there being too much bad in the world, there is too much good. We must knock it out, and make this world the devil's own place. I see you have your ears pierced. When did that happen?" This was sort of changing the thread of the conversation, but Bob explained that he had worked in a camp at Quaker Bridge, in the Indian Reservation, in western New York, and had worn earrings for one winter to please a young woman he met there. "Take these as a token of my regard," said the stranger, as he pulled a pair of richly fashioned rings from his ears. "Wear them always. They will help you to be one devil of a fellow, and an arch-enemy of all that is good." Bob looked at the ornaments before placing them on his ears. They were in the form of coiled serpents, exquisitely made, and while apparently of gold, were transparent as crystal, and light as feathers. "How can I ever thank you, stranger?" he replied. "Can I do something for you? Won't you take my coat? You must be cold, sitting there without even a shirt." The stranger laughed and said, "I come from a hot place. I'll take it. But let that be the last good deed you do. Henceforth, try to break every law, moral, civil, or divine, as long as you live." "It's a go," said Bob, and they clasped hands. The stranger opened the door and disappeared down the path toward the creek. The next morning, while Bob was trying to corral his lost associates, he found the coat hanging on a sapling near the spring. He felt for the earrings. They were there all right, and he vowed to be as mean as he could from that day on. In this he was eminently successful, and he had been charged with 6 murders before he was brought to book in Kansas.